Welcome to Conversations on Social Work Careers. My name is Jennifer Luna, and I write a column for the New Social Worker magazine called Your Career Coach. And I also get to host this lovely show with different social workers from around the country. And today I am so excited because we have a really innovative, interesting topic that's it's not creeping up on us anymore. It's here. Today we're going to be talking about AI and social work. And we actually have two other authors from the New Social Worker magazine. One is Dr. Allan Barsky. And I'm going to let y'all introduce yourselves and a little more. And then the other is Dr. Gina Griffin. And both of them have written articles recently in the New Social Worker, really exciting stuff. And I'm just so grateful that you're sharing this time with me today and with our viewers to kind of get us up to date and look at opportunities and considerations.
Thank you for the great introductions. Again, Allan Barsky. I'm a professor at the Sandler School of Social Work at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton. I enjoy teaching conflict resolution and ethics and various practice classes, and I've served with the National Ethics Committee, including the changes that were made to the NASW Code of Ethics in 2017 that had to do with the addition of technology. And had we been a few years later and had more inclinations about the impacts of AI, I think we would have made a few more changes, but so far the Code of Ethics is standing up pretty well.
And I'm Gina Griffin. I'm a social worker and a trauma therapist in Florida. I'm in private practice at Frost Bauer Counseling. I write a lot about technology and social work, most of it for the New Social Worker magazine and some other publications. Mostly I'm just curious. I've always been very involved with technology, starting with my background in graphic design. So I've always worked with technology. And so when I became a social worker, naturally I started to think of ways to start to marry those two things. And I'm really excited that social work is starting to really understand that we really need to integrate a lot more technology into our practice so that we can keep moving forward and thinking about ethical ways to do that.
Thank you. Both of your articles were so good and thorough and interesting. And we will definitely have those in the show notes. But I kind of wanted to start this conversation by just giving people who haven't really thought about AI and social work, how are social workers incorporating AI in their practice at various levels?
Do you want to go first?
I am less involved in teachings, but I will tell you what I have seen and what I think would be helpful. I think ways that would be helpful are things like using apps like ChatGPT to write things like web content, especially if you have a small staff and you don't have a lot of time and people to dedicate to those types of things. Doing analysis of things that are happening in your area. So looking at data and trying to predict trends. For example, if rent is going up astronomically, as it is in our area, then that's probably going to predict some problems with homelessness for people in your community, right? And so maybe thinking ahead about how you can organize communities so that they can deal with those types of things better. So that would be some ways to use those things in agencies.
So from a clinical perspective, not just social work, but psychology, other mental health professionals, and medicine, they're using various types of AI and other forms of technology, because not all the uses of digital technology is necessarily artificial intelligence, but we're already seeing AI being used in intake and screenings, so that people can screen for risks of violence, risks of suicidal ideation, risks of child abuse and neglect, elder abuse and neglect, various types of intake forms. Some of the electronic records that people are keeping may have components that have AI within them. And there's various types of clinical interventions that are making use of AI. It used to be if you were providing a client with an intervention to help them with relaxation, stress management, etc., they would have just one type of app that one size fits all. But now there are apps that can address, particular types of concerns, and somebody who's experienced trauma may require different types of relaxation exercises than somebody who doesn't have that type of history. There's apps helping people with, various types of mental health issues, including, schizophrenia and different types of anxiety disorders. We can also have groups and family sessions that are facilitated by AI. So let's say you've got a family that's got a conflict situation, and AI can be programmed to help them to identify the nature of the conflict, to think about different types of options, and help them to think about creative solutions. So there's all sorts of different types of options there. And then in the macro environment, we have to start thinking about how to promote social justice and how to promote various other types of policy and legal changes in the community using AI. There's already in politics and in campaigning the use of AI to identify different strategies for reaching out to various types of populations or groups to try to persuade them. And rather than having in the old days television one size fits all, depending on how you identify, liberal or conservative or male or female or transgender, you could have different messages that are being sent to different people. So not sure how many social workers are using them per se, but these are being used, in the current campaigns.
I think this is so fascinating just from the get-go, because in my role, I work with students and social workers on career development and on their materials to apply for jobs. And oftentimes with students, if they're really stuck, I'll encourage them to use ChatGPT to get some ideas of how to articulate their skills, not to write the letter or write the resume, but just get some ideas, especially if they're looking at different industries that maybe they're not familiar with. And more often than not, a lot of them haven't even tried ChatGPT yet, or haven't tried AI yet. And to learn that it's already in the field, it just makes me wonder, where are they learning it? And, where are they going to get those skills? Did you have a comment?
So, many of our younger social workers are so used to technology and using various types of applications already, just transitioning to use of generative AI. So that's what a chat GPT is. It generates, text and language. Isn't such a huge thing, but there's a lot of ethical issues that are related to it. And you said, well, why don't you have chat GPT identify, what some of your skills or things that you could put on a CV or a cover letter. I'd actually encourage people to, at least brainstorm themselves first, so that the creativity isn't all left to Chat GPT, and then get more ideas from Chat GPT, and not to just rely on it to give you the best answer. I still believe that, we use technology as a tool, and that way we're not being controlled by technology or limited by technology. So there may be things that you would think of if you brainstormed with a friend that ChatGPT wouldn't have come up with. And as soon as you see ChatGPT, you think, oh, this is what I should write, and maybe not.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree with Allan. I think it should be a tool and not something that we rely on 100%. I think it would be really tragic if people lost the ability to write because we rely so much on the tool, and that really is a concern of mine. So really trying to find ways to integrate it into the workflow without giving everything over to the use of the tool. And there are places now that I think are teaching these types of skills in social work. I was just in a really great class at Columbia School of Social Work. They teach online pedagogy. And so we discuss a lot of these things. And one of the folks in my cohort mentioned that they were actually teaching a class on social work and technology this semester. So I think that's probably becoming more common, and I think that's really welcome. I think it's really necessary.
Yeah, they used to say when you were doing programming, garbage in, garbage out. And the same kind of applies with ChatGPT. If you don't ask a well-formed question, you may not get the types of answers that you want. So learning how to not just ask the first question, but even the follow-up questions. So I've been experimenting with ChatGPT, and I give it a topic and it doesn't write a very clear or coherent response, or it's not on the right level of academic or scholarly rigor. And so I'll ask it to rewrite it, and I'll give it further directions, and it'll come out better.
Yeah, I think the questions are definitely key. I think with what a lot of times what social workers struggle with, again, is just the industry language, because our careers are changing so quickly. Like even us just talking about AI today, there's a lot of things that I still don't understand. And the job market is changing. And so I think, to be able to use it, as you said, Gina, as a coach or a consultant, to try to translate, what does case management mean from a corporate, opinion or sector, and being able to just gather ideas. But ultimately, in a job search or in writing or an assignment, authenticity is the key, right? Like being authentic. And I think that's something that would never be able to be replaced.
Perhaps.
Perhaps, right?
Perhaps. AI is getting better and better. And, since you're kind of inviting, definitions. So think of artificial intelligence as, it's not exactly mimicking what the brain does, but it is looking at various sources of data. So depending on what sources of data are fed into it or are available to it, it's really just taking information that is previously known, putting it together and maybe reassembling it. So it's not necessarily doing, innovative research, and it's not necessarily doing, empathy and the type of, critical thinking and analysis that we might do in our interactions with clients.
I have to disagree on one part. I read a study recently where they compared physicians in a clinical setting and a chatbot, and the chatbot actually outranked the physicians in empathy. So it's creeping up on us, and I think that's something we have to start to think about.
So I would
Wow.
say that, thank you for the correction. I would say that the AI doesn't actually have empathy. We may be perceiving empathy, we may be perceiving understanding, but it's still a tool. There was actually research on giving social robots, social dogs to older adults. And they formed, attachments to these dogs as if they were real dogs. But these dogs did not care about their owners. They didn't have empathy or compassion. But we are able to, interpret the way that they respond to us as being empathy.
Right, but perception is reality. So if people feel that the chatbot is doing a better job, then that's their reality, right?
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens as it moves forward. I think they've done a lot of those types of studies with physicians specifically, and I'm not trying to say bad things about doctors, but I know that those are things where there's always been a challenge in that field, and so they've been constantly trying to think of ways to improve things like empathy and bedside manner, and so things like mindfulness have been introduced into educating people in those fields. So I know that's always been a struggle for them, which is to say that maybe it's not surprising that the chatbot does just as well or better. So maybe they can actually find some way to use those tools and to get those responses from those folks to see what it is that the people are responding to, so that they can help people that they're training in those professions, so that they can.
And have they investigated from a diversity perspective? So are all patients feeling that their professionals are being empathic, or is it only majority populations and maybe not people of color or people who identify as LGBTQ? Because again, you have to program the AI to be able to demonstrate empathy. So it'll hopefully improve, but there's been a lot of critique about what information is being drawn to support the AI.
Mhm.
I think it would be nice if we could program some people to demonstrate empathy as well. So this kind of leads us into our next question, which is discussing challenges and opportunities. And so the first point that we have is on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how AI might present some challenges with that, or lend some opportunities.
Well, traditionally, there have been a lot of challenges with AI when it comes to racism and equity and inclusion. There have been a lot of examples from early on where the algorithms didn't function the way that we would have wanted them to. A really popular example, a really famous example, has to do with some of the algorithms that they use to determine recidivism. And they're supposed to be racially blind, but they use other things that are really closely correlated to race, like zip codes. And so those are incredibly biased. And so you're still
Wow.
seeing a really large number of people of color who are being denied the opportunity to go out on bail because this is a biased algorithm. Another really famous one was there was an algorithm they were using at, I think it was Google or Amazon. I think it was Amazon. And it was looking at people's resumes. And what they found is that it was down selecting women because it was looking at the schools that they went to and interests that they had. And those were also really closely correlated to being female. And so it was down selecting those and choosing men. So they actually had to stop using that. There are also issues with things like predictive policing, where they are watching specific neighborhoods to see what is happening with the crime rates there. And the problem with something like that is that anything that where you're watching is where you're going to see things happening. So if you're watching a specific neighborhood here and you're not watching a neighborhood there, you're not going to see the crime rates going up, or you're not going to see what's happening in that neighborhood because it's not being watched. So they're very heavily policing these neighborhoods where they believe that there is going to be crime. And so of course, when things happen, it just reinforces what they already believed. And so then they assign more officers and more resources. And of course, the outcomes on that are really, really huge because it creates more stress on those communities. And then of course, stress correlates to things like shorter lifespans and more chronic illnesses. So we really have to start thinking more broadly about how those things affect the people that we work with.
Gina,
Yeah,
just for the purpose of our audience and maybe people who aren't as familiar with technology, could you explain an algorithm?
I will do my best.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe Allan can do better. But and a lot of the time nobody can really see them. But it's
Right.
sort of
That's true.
yeah, it's a formula that guides what it is that you're trying to do. And it can be predictive. Like I think I'm looking for this. And so tell me if you find it. And so a lot of things go into that. We feed a lot of data into a machine, we train it so that we were telling it what it is that we're looking for. So I am looking for crimes in this area. The people who live in the area look this way, and the borders of the area look like this. And so they feed a lot of information into it that would give information about that area. But the problem is that we don't always know what's going into the machine. We don't know what's being fed into the algorithm. I sound like my mom saying the machine. So we don't always know what's going into the algorithm. And those are called black box algorithms. And those are generally proprietary by private companies. So we're not going to know what goes into them. And as Allan said, garbage in, garbage out. So the problem is that a lot of people feed their own biases into these things without sometimes being aware of it. So maybe they're not aware that they're biased towards people of a certain color, people of a certain community. And so maybe then the algorithm is going to be a little bit more biased towards people in that community. So like, for example, I'm trying to give an example. Yeah, there's actually a book about this, and I think it's from someone at USC. If you search for the words white girl on Google, you will get pictures of a white girl in all sorts of different clothes and so forth. If you search for black girl, you will get things that are much more derogatory, like almost pornographic. And that's something that they've had to work with. And surely somebody's bias fed into that. And so that's something they've been trying to address, because I would like to think nobody intended for that to happen, but
Mhm.
that is what has been happening. So does that help?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Did you want to say anything related to algorithms, Allan?
I think Gina did a great job. You might just think of it, it's like a program or an app. It's a program that, kind of identifies, gathers, and filters data and helps to make decisions. So if it's, Facebook or Instagram, it's, well, what should come to the top of your feed? And if it's for, advertising, what type of advertisements should come up? So I did a Google search for my daughter on eco-friendly feminine products. And for weeks, I was just getting more and more stuff that was ads geared towards women, even though that wasn't my primary focus or my primary interest. So you do have to use technology, and then sometimes there are ways that we can correct for it, but sometimes you're being subjected to something and you don't have an active voice in what it's doing. So if you look at facial recognition technology, it was designed to accurately identify people, and it's made all sorts of mistakes, particularly for people of color. And partly it was not because they intended to do that, but they didn't have enough examples of faces, and so the program did not develop the intelligence to make accurate responses. So we are sometimes repeating racism and discrimination, and sometimes making it even worse than it was pre-AI. But we can correct for that, and we can actually take out biases from predictive assessments.
That kind of leads to my next question, which is, what would be some opportunities related to DEI that AI could provide to social workers?
So please, 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 social workers, make friends in the business and computer and information technology services, because if we can help to inform what they're doing, we can help them kind of attend to these types of issues and problems and kind of preempt them. So I think NASW had an article that's been circulating, be curious about AI, but be skeptical. So we have to have kind of this balance in what we're doing. So just because something's new doesn't mean that it's bad, but it also doesn't mean that it's great. So if there's opportunities to pilot test something, this term I'm pilot testing Samucase with my students, and I know others have pilot tested it as well, but they're going to be practicing different types of engagement and assessment skills using video and a program that the client will respond differently depending on which responses the student chooses. And so does that really help students to become better social workers, or is it teaching a formula and they're actually not going to be able to adapt that, take that AI environment and put it into practice for in person without AI?
I agree with Allan on curiosity. Don't be afraid to try new things and play with things. One of the things I started doing almost immediately after I became a social worker was learning how to code, which most people couldn't put those things together. But it's been really helpful, and it has a lot of applications. And so I learned how to do R programming, and just being involved in that community and being around other people who thought that way has been really helpful. Could I write an algorithm? Probably not, but I have a better understanding of what it is and how people use them. And then, I have connections with other people in that field. And then there are some organizations that would probably be really helpful to look into. And those are like Data for Good, which you can find online. And I'm probably going to say it wrong, but Husita, Husita. And that's a really good organization. Lauren Nissen's Social Work Futures Lab does a lot of really interesting things. And so, of course, they're looking very closely at AI. So just really looking for those opportunities and figuring out how you can become more involved in how a lot of these decisions are made. And I think that'll help to improve. I think that'll help to improve the outcomes. It'll help us to shape the futures that we want, like Laura would probably say.
Yeah,
Let's
some of us will become users of AI more than creators and developers, but you never know where you're going to end up in your career. So I like Gina's approach of trying things out.
What about in terms of privacy, confidentiality, accountability? How would AI either jeopardize that or perhaps ensure a more, confidential or trustworthy relationship with a client?
So we need to know when we enter information into AI on our computer, our phones, or wherever, how can that information be used? Are they harvesting information, and is that going to be used in other ways? And is that okay with us? And I know people already have put private client information into ChatGPT to help them to write psychosocial assessments. And that's inappropriate because that information, you don't know where it's going to go. So you could be subjecting your clients to, infringements of their privacy. And even beyond that, because you mentioned, the importance of building trusting relationships with clients. So when we're going to actively use AI with clients or refer clients to the use of AI, we want to find out, are they okay sharing information into this system? And does it have protections? Like, is it, if you're working in a health or mental health environment, is it HIPAA compliant? And if not, perhaps don't use it. A lot of times we're using free services for AI, and they're not necessarily HIPAA compliant. And your agencies may need to invest in types of AI that have higher levels of protection. And those are just still being, developed and thought of.
Yeah, unfortunately, I could mostly think of times when there have been bad outcomes when trying to work with privacy. For example, I think a lot of us probably work with companies like Spectrum, and now you have a voice imprint that's supposed to make your account safer, and those have already been fooled. So the attempt was to try to help us, but it didn't work out very well. So I think that's one of the situations where the technology is growing a lot more quickly than we've been able to keep up with it. And so we have to think about that a little bit more. And there have been some circumstances, for example, where putting information together from a child's Instagram account, people have been able to fool their parents, convince them that they have been kidnapped, and try to hold them to giving them a ransom. And so those are some of the ways that people are misusing those types of things. I think that it's almost a bigger question than AI. I think that we have to start thinking differently about how we use and how we manage data overall. I think people have to have rights to their own data. And what we see now is that, if you agree to use a particular app or program or platform, your data belongs to them. And I think that's problematic. And in other places like in the EU, there are already things that have been written to protect, or at least to attempt to protect the rights of the people who the data originates from. So for example, the data can only be held for a specific amount of time by the platform, and it's going to be erased after a certain time. And they will tell you specifically how it's going to be used, and anything else would be a violation. So I think that we really have to get some of those types of things into place to protect all of us.
And on a positive, because as you were mentioning all the risks, I was trying to think of what's a positive. So some people, perhaps because they're LGBTQ or they're a survivor of domestic violence or something, they may be uncertain about reaching out to a social worker or a helping professional face-to-face in person, but they might be willing to speak with a social robot or submit information to an online form, and they might disclose things that they might not disclose in person. And we do have some research in the medical field that sometimes people disclose concerns about themselves online that they wouldn't initially disclose in person. So again, it's not necessarily one or the other. It may be a combination. And how do we maximize the different needs of the clients and the different abilities of AI and ourselves in person?
And then one of the things that we were going to discuss was if clients could have a meaningful relationship with social robots equipped with AI. And you just gave a really great example. So if somebody felt comfortable disclosing trauma to a social robot, and then what happens next?
So that was one of the new social work articles that I wrote. And I think it's incumbent on people who create these types of apps to have something built in where there is a follow-up that's provided, at the very minimum. If there's a risk such as suicide or child abuse, that there's contact information or online links and things like that. But for some types of programs, you may want to have automatic sharing of information to 988, which is now the mental health equivalent of 911, so that somebody can contact them.
Mhm.
And already there's social media for young people. It's to help them start to make use of social media in a safe environment that has information that will be shared with teachers or designated others, so that people know going in that this information may be shared. So if they start talking about guns or knives or pills or whatever, that somebody else will take a look at that and see whether there needs to be an intervention.
Yeah, I
But
think.
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
There's a number of programs already out there that don't have any sort of reporting mechanisms in them. And you asked about accountability. And so that's one of the issues with turning things over to machines. The same thing is going to happen with driverless cars. Like if a driverless car gets into an accident, who's at fault? And so a driverless social worker, an automated social worker, are we responsible if we referred people to them? Are just the manufacturers or the computer scientists who developed the program are responsible, or is it the Wild West, and whoever uses it, they're at their own risk? And hopefully not that.
Yeah, I think there are some platforms that are already doing some things like that. I believe Facebook has that built in for suicidal ideation. And so they're using, I think, natural language processing so that they can look at the pattern of what someone says over time. And there are some pretty good indicators that maybe they're becoming more depressed, or that they're talking about suicidality. And then they will either get in touch with that person or direct them to some type of help. And we probably need a lot more of that.
And if
I was going
people
to say
are
maybe
if people are planning terrorism or plots against our government,
Mhm.
that's also being flagged now.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. My brain went away for a minute because I was like, "Then what are the rights involved in that? Does it violate anything?" So that's where my brain was going. But those are the types of problems we have to think about, and that's why we need social workers on these types of teams so that we can point out those problems to programmers and project managers who might not think about those things, right?
And that we can understand AI and the limits on confidentiality and privacy and exceptions, so that we can engage our clients in proper informed consent, or have informed consent built into some of these programs as well.
Yeah.
Video informed consent may actually be better than oral informed consent or written informed consent.
So with all of this in mind, and with this, rapid advancement that's happening, are social workers concerned that AI could take their place?
I'm sure
Yes.
I'm sure most people, I think anybody is concerned about that these days. And I think we just kind of have to wait and see. I personally, I don't think anything is ever really going to replace that human connection.
Yeah.
I think we can work with the technology instead of one or the other. But we have to wait and see. What I have seen is that a lot of jobs with less advanced skill levels are being targeted for those types of things. Like there are fast food restaurants where they're programming robotic arms to flip burgers, which is another problem. And that's another place where social
Right.
workers get involved, is in how do you organize people to create a union so you're not going to be replaced by chatbots to take orders or robotic arms. But as far as social workers, I think it would be a bad decision. But we'll have to wait and see what happens with that trend.
So as in a lot of ethics questions, there's a lot of it depends. And I was just at a session yesterday, and they were talking about, and Laura Neeson would approve of this in terms of futures, in order to project the future, possible futures, look at the past. And so they gave the example of elevator operators. So at the beginning, every elevator had to have an operator. And when they switched to automated elevators, there were all sorts of improvements. They could go higher, they could go faster. It was cheaper. But at first, people were scared to step in them. If there's not somebody operating them, how do we know this isn't going to crash on us, or whatever else? And so, whether it was, the invention of cars, or more recently, different types of social media, there's always been concerns, and some of them legitimate, and we do have to take them seriously. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to replace all jobs. And I think, as Gina is kind of hinting at, is sometimes it's going to create new jobs. And so if you're concerned, is it going to take my job, learn more about AI and how to use AI, and you may be in a better place to position yourself for the new world of social work jobs.
Right, like one of the jobs that has grown up around the use of AI is writing prompts. So they need prompt engineers, and I'm sure they're going to need.
Oh, I like that title.
I can't take
That's a
credit for
great title.
I'm sure they'll need specialized prompt engineers for industries like mental health, so that they understand how to write those correctly so that they get the outcome that they want. So again, as Allan said, figuring out how to use that technology, that's something that a lot of social workers might want to start looking at.
Yeah, and since a lot of the people who read the new social worker and are listening to this are students, use your classes and talk to your professors. If they've got something in their syllabus that says no use of ChatGPT, ask them, are there appropriate uses and inappropriate uses? Because there may be ways that you can tailor the course or tailor certain assignments to be able to do it in a particular way. Like, in the old days, I'd have students do genograms by hand. But what was the problem if they used the genogram program to do it? They're still developing a genogram, but they have to be responsible for, is it accurate, and is it something that's accessible to all people? And so there's the cost of the technology as well. And ChatGPT, there's a free version, and then there's a fee-for-service version. Those who can afford the fee-for-service version are going to get higher quality results. So there's fairness and equity issues as well.
What would be some advice that you would give somebody, a social worker who had no idea what AI is? Kind of what's the bare minimum you should know about it, or where could you learn about it? I know so many people who don't use technology unless they have to, they're not on social media, and or they say, I don't have the time to learn that. What would be some advice that you would give to those folks?
Well, clearly it's something we're discussing at New Social Worker magazine, and we're thinking about how it affects social work. So that's probably a good place. There are threads you can follow on LinkedIn, follow hashtag on LinkedIn, and now the artist formerly known as Twitter. So you can look for AI, you could look for social work tech, in places where people are discussing those types of things. There's some really great books if you have a little more time, if you can stand an audiobook. So one of my favorites is Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill. And of course, I'm going to draw a blank on the rest of them right now. But those are written for laymen, and so they're pretty easy to understand. So I would definitely start in areas like that. And then I especially like the stuff by Virginia Eubanks about technology overall, and how responsible use of technology and working with the community. And those are really great books for people working in social services.
And maybe just dive in and experiment. So Google or do a search for OpenAI. That's the ChatGPT website, and don't pay money up front, and just do it for practice purposes. Ask it to write a poem or a love letter or whatever you want, and then think about other creative uses and maybe how you might use it in practice one day, or whatever your interests are. There are AI programs that do art and music, and you may be an art therapist, or you may want to use music in your interactions with clients, and this might be ways to be able to connect with them. We know that certain populations just talk therapy doesn't work so great. So if you've got something interactive for a person with autism, for example, AI might be a good supplement.
Yeah, and Adobe has developed an ethical AI art program where all of the art has been sourced.
Oh, I saw that.
quickly. Yeah, so that, because that's been one of the fears that has arisen around AI art. So all of this is from stuff that was either open source or people that had permission from, or stuff that was from Adobe stock. So that's a really fun one to play with, and you have to sign up for the beta at this point. But the times are coming down for you to get permission to work with it, and it's kind of fun because I like to do that all the time.
That's
and
awesome.
and make friends, find out which professors are doing it, find out what other students, if you or your friends have young kids, talk to them, just network.
The first time I really dabbled in it, I was taking a trip with my dog. It was about a 2,000-mile trip on the road, and I asked it to plan a trip for me with my pet, driving, with dog-friendly hotels and restaurants and activities. And it was just unbelievable. I mean, it was just a great start to, things I could do and places I could go. And it was, helpful. So I kind of want to finish our conversation on some of the hopeful things that y'all are thinking about in terms of the use of AI. And I'd like to hear from each of you. What are you most hopeful for in terms of the possibilities that AI will create either for social workers or for our clients?
I think it's so good at seeing trends and possible outcomes, and maybe it's better at catching things before they happen. That would be really great. So preventing things like homelessness, helping people to identify food deserts, so that people can get the proper nutrition and get the proper staffing in there so that they can help people to have what they need. And so really just finding really great ways to use this socially that maybe we haven't thought about yet. And really just getting it into the hands of more people, and all sorts of organizations, so that we can really help our clients, help them to stay out of the hospital so that they can have more of a life that's not spent on an inpatient psychiatry ward. And that would be amazing. So helping them to recognize those things before they start to happen. So I think there are all sorts of possibilities, and I think we just really have to have more of us who have that type of outlook, who are involved with those things so that we can put them to use and improve the quality of life for people.
Thank you. How about you, Allan?
So I, again, emphasize some of the things that Gina was talking about, just in terms of research, and also looking at, large data sets. If we, look back historically with math, we used to do it all by, hand, whether it's multiplication, division, even, standard deviations, it was all done by hand. And it was a lot easier when we got calculators, and then even easier when we got stronger computers and programming. And now with analyzing large data sets and having real-time information, being able to do some, better, predictive analysis and things like that, identifying what works with whom, I think will be stronger. So I think there's all sorts of opportunities there. On my wish list, and I don't know how this is going to happen, I've really been concerned in the last decades or so about all sorts of misinformation that's being spread in social media and other media. And hoping that AI will come up with some solutions. I don't know if it's fact checking or some way of making sure that, we're hearing about deep fakes where you can, Gina also talked about this, that people are pretending that there's somebody else, or putting up videos or other images or voices of other people. Hopefully that AI can also solve some of these problems and help us to, make better decisions about our environment, about our economy, and about people's health and mental health, as well as their social well-being.
Thank you. We need about 3 episodes on this topic, I think.
And what we say today will be dated tomorrow.
Right. We have to get it out fast. Well, thank you both so much for sharing this information. And for our viewers, we'll have some of the sources that Gina cited in the show notes, and also information on how to contact Allan or Gina, and links to their articles or anything else that y'all would like to add to that. And for our viewers, make some comments. Let's have a conversation about this. You can drop a comment on YouTube channel, and would love to just hear what your thoughts are and how you're using it, any opportunities or challenges that you might be having. So thank you all both very much for your time. And we might need to circle back to this next year.
I'm sure I'll be here.
Yeah,
Thanks very much. Keep the conversation, creativity going.
Yep.
thank you.